Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. This is episode 35. Today I sit down with Rosa Del Duca, Clifton Hicks, Ramon Meja, and JJ Rodriguez to discuss conscientious objectors in the U.S. military, to include some of the major motivators that push them to do it, what tips they might offer to someone else in their shoes, and the resources they use to get through their time in service.
When I made it to my home place, I found triumph of the will. Where once lay a shining city, stood a fortress on a hill.
Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. This is episode 35. Today I sit down with Rosa Del Duca, Clifton Hicks, Ramon Meja, and JJ Rodriguez to discuss conscientious objectors in the U.S. military, to include some of the major motivators that push them to do it, what tips they might offer to someone else that's in their shoes, and the resources they used to get through their time in service. Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. This is episode 35. Today I sit down with Rosa Del Duca, Clifton Hicks, Ramon Meja, and JJ Rodriguez to discuss conscientious objectors in the U.S. military, to include some of the major motivators that push them to do it, what tips they might offer to someone else in their shoes, and the resources they use to get through their time in service. Welcome to Fortress on a Hill. Thank you for joining us. For those new to the show, Danny and I are two progressive veterans who take the military and veteran stories of the day and add some much needed context. Well, welcome everybody to our conscientious objectors panel. Like to give a real quick disclaimer for JJ, the one that Danny usually gives. And that is that none of us speak for the Department of Defense or the Army in our opinions. We're giving our unofficial personal opinions in what we're sharing today. Conscientious objection is something that most people have zero experience with. And I think that that's really a shame. And the greatest numbers historically have usually been in wars that have had the draft. And I had mentioned to the guys here when we were talking a little bit ago that, these days DOD I think it was the Army actually, Army gets, maybe 50 applications a year and they approve maybe half of them. And so what I'd like to talk about today is I want to talk about the human cost. I want to talk about the personal things that pushed on us and the leaders that affected us, whether positively or negatively. And so to start us off, I want to talk about our collective motivations to join the military, because I think those are the part of the really important building blocks for becoming a conscientious objector. And the question would be, if you could give one sentence as to the greatest motivation that caused you to join, what would that be? And since I get to pick on everybody today, I'm going to start us off. I had two major motivations in joining the Army. One was to pay for college. At the time, I had vast dreams of working for some kind of three-letter agency, probably law enforcement. And I knew that I needed college to make that happen. I saw how hard my parents worked. I knew that they would try to help me with college, but we weren't well off, and I didn't want to burden them in that way. The second motivation was a career one. I came from a small town where people told me all the time that being in the military was great. You get a regular paycheck, you get 30 days leave a year, and that came mostly from people that had no experience with the military, but it really did color how I saw it at the beginning. And I think it gave the idea of the military a legitimacy, and it gave me a confidence that I shouldn't have had. And I think those unchallenged assumptions are really gross. Like, quote, the military are professionals, end quote. Well, they're usually only professional when people are looking. But when people aren't looking, they'll behave themselves, right? End quote. No, that's when the truly horrendous stuff happens, when service members believe that other people aren't looking. So here is my biggest unchallenged assumption, and it was, I went there to help, but I didn't help anyone, not in the abstract, not in actually making their country better. We went there, we called murdering innocent people the cost of freedom, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, Rosa, I'm going to pick on you first. What would you say was some of your main motivations to join, and have you observed any assumptions that came with?
Yeah, sure. So I joined, it was in 2000, November of 2000. So I was really looking for a way to pay for college and maybe have some little adventures, either fighting forest fires. I joined in Montana, the Montana National Guard, or traveling to Germany 2 weeks a year in the summer. And I had no family history of military service in my family. I didn't know anybody. So I really didn't, I had no experience with it. But when the National Guard recruiter came in, unlike the Army and the Marines, maybe the Navy guy, I didn't want to do something full time. I wanted to, do something part time and pay for college. And it seemed like an ideal situation, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. That's awesome. You do the math, it's like 90% civilian, 10% soldier. So those were some of the assumptions I went in with. And then, a year later, everything drastically changed.
No, I listened to your first episode yesterday, and there was one comment that you made that I'm not sure if it was you quoting yourself or this was from one of your sisters, but I was going to get college paid for, and I'd be free in 6 years. And I remember having those kind of thoughts. That maybe join the National Guard, no big deal. And in Oregon, we fight forest fires too, but also floods. And so, not a bad thing. And then the whole thing changed. But the reality is that it was only the politics of the time that really had the change. No one pointed it out to us. No one, they can go at any time. That's something Danny and I talk about pretty often, is that the orders can be rewritten, MOSs can be changed, assignments can be thrown in the garbage can. There's a lot of control that they don't talk about. And
exactly. Yeah, they don't. They tell you, you have all these options, like, oh, you got that high score on your ASVAB, you qualify for all of these jobs, you can pick whichever one you want. But then, it's whittled down to what units are near you and what MOSs are open there. And then they get you by saying, oh, you can always transfer into another MOS whenever you want.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's not true either.
Yeah, I remember a National Guard recruiter that I dealt with told people that if they enlisted in the National Guard and didn't like it, that he had a way of discharging them so they could join a different branch if they wanted to. And so that kind of, it made him kind of the Pentagon of recruiters. It's like, I can give you anything you want. And I never checked with anybody to see if it was right or if he actually was able to make it happen. I'm guessing not. But it's this wide open, gorgeous apple pie to eat. And then when you finally get to the pie tin, it's like a few crumbs left, if there ever was a pie there.
Yeah.
I like pie. It just seemed apt. So how about you other guys? Clifton, JJ, were there things on the way in that you've kind of noticed on the back end here that really told you something without proof, so to speak?
Clifton, you can go if you want.
Okay. So reasons for joining. For me, it was, I have actually a long family history of being in the military.
So coming up, I kind of figured that it was, I was going to do it anyhow. And then the September 11th attacks happened. And so I got real fired up over that. I got caught up in that, like a lot of people, and was hell bent on going then. Whereas before, I maybe wanted to be in military intelligence, or maybe I was going to join the Navy or something. After September 11th, I decided to go combat arms because I was real eager to like get revenge and all that stuff. Anything that a 17-year-old wants, So that was, it started out as family tradition, and then it turned into, just an intense desire to fight. I wanted to fight and kill and all that stuff. And then sort of the third lurking background reason was that there were no other options for me. I had dropped out of high school and had homeschooled myself so I could get a diploma just so I could join the Army. Otherwise, I never would have done that. I didn't want to go to college. But there were no other options for me, and it was convenient that a war happened, and I wanted to fight. So that's what I did. It was an honor thing, It seemed like the only honorable option for someone like me was military service.
No, I come from a family of military service as well, and I remember as a little boy looking at my grandfather's medals and, again, admiring them, but not analyzing the cost. And as kids, we don't do that. We see things, and we love our veteran relatives, whoever they happen to be. We don't always move those out. But I know that my strong family lineage of service definitely played a role in me joining. And then, like you said, with September 11th, the calculus changed. I tried to enlist as a Ranger, and thank God I have a color vision issue, so I got to be an MP, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah.
But I certainly didn't think that way at the time. But I'm really grateful that that turn of events happened in the way it did, or my experience would be very different. So, JJ, were you going to say something, brother?
No, I was just I was going to tell my story if you're wrapping up.
Go for it, man.
Yeah, so when 9/11 happened, I was in first grade. So I can't say that that's what fired me up to join the military. But not to make y'all feel a certain way. But I was in a military family, so I knew that meant my dad was a military, career officer. So I knew when that happened, even at that age, that he was going to be gone and he was going to go to war. And it was a terrifying thought for me, having that personal investment in it. But I was invested in, what some people would call the propaganda now, but I was all about it. Like, going into high school, I wanted to go to West Point, and that was like my dream all throughout high school. And that was it. Like, my reason for initially joining was my father's service, try to follow his legacy or continue his legacy, and wanting to serve my country. So I got into West Point, and that's when I started questioning sort of the base assumptions of some of that propaganda I mentioned earlier, of service to country and whatnot. I mean, I graduated West Point in 2016. It's 2019 now, and I feel like I haven't been of service to any person on earth. Like, I don't know, maybe I made a couple dollars for some defense industry folks, but that's about it. So that's where I'm at. Like I said, I started questioning the assumptions at West Point, but I still graduated, got through, and came to Fort Campbell here to an infantry unit. And some of the commentary that the people around me were talking about with relation to war really made me start to double down on these questions, because I'd already heard some of it at West Point. Obviously, people try to hype themselves up. My dad calls it bravado, but I don't think it's natural to be talking about blowing people's heads up, in a kind of ha-ha way. So obviously, an infantry battalion, they're going to talk like that, and it really got to a point of crisis. And January 2018, thank goodness, I got in contact with another conscientious objector, a buddy of mine by the name of Matt Malcolm. He put his packet in right after West Point. He was a classmate at West Point, and he talked me through the process, and I was like, this is it for me. I'm doing that. January 2018. So February 2018, I had finished all the packet and turned that in. It's been a year now, and I'm just now finishing up the process.
Do you have any idea how much longer, do you think?
So I'm in contact with Quaker House out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. Great people. They've helped me throughout the whole process. They say that once it reaches the Department of the Army Conscientious Objector Review Board, it should be 2 to 3 months.
So hopefully maybe the next under 6, somewhere in there?
Yeah, that same buddy, Matt Malcolm, he said that once it got to that point, the DA review board, it took about 11 months. So anywhere between 2 and 11 months.
Well, I'm still going to keep my fingers crossed for you. I hope it goes quickly. So the next question I wanted to throw out there was about the first leader that you told that you wanted to apply to be a CO. And, I would think most of us, you'd want to pick somebody that might seem favorable to it, but you guys may have been in situations where there wasn't someone that seemed trusting enough that you could ask for advice or even just say, this is what I want to do now. I don't know that I had any NCOs or officers when I was in that I would have been able to do that with, but I want to hear from you guys. Did any of those experiences color how you moved forward with your packet and with your end of time in the military?
Well, I'll start off, I guess. So for me, I was in a cavalry squadron. We had just got back from Iraq when I decided that I had to do this. And there was, there was absolutely no helping hand, of course. And also, in their defense, they were completely ignorant of not just the process, but they didn't even know there was a regulation covering it. They were all ignorant of what a conscientious objector even was. They didn't even have a definition for it. Everybody thought that it was some kind of pacifist or something, which it could be. But so for me, it was a whole big process. And this was in late 2004 or early 2005. I was on a relatively, what I would call a relatively remote, small base in Germany. There was only 800 of us on the base and no females, for example, and nobody over the rank of lieutenant colonel. So there was not a lot of oversight, and the chain of command kind of got away with a lot more than I think maybe they would on a bigger base and stuff like that. So I knew about the inspector general hotline and stuff like that. So I was always calling up the inspector general and raising hell, and so they knew I was a troublemaker and stuff, and it was sort of became known that I wasn't going to go back to Iraq. But so the whole I'm leading up to is there was no internet on our base, so there was really it was really difficult there was internet in the NCO barracks, which I didn't have access to. I had just been demoted to E1 and had just clawed my way back up to E3, so I was nowhere near the internet on the NCO barracks. But fortunately for me, when I'd gotten in trouble in Iraq, which is a whole separate story, when I got in trouble, they pulled me off of my tank. I was in a tank platoon. They pulled me out of that, put me in headquarters. So now I worked back in Germany in the orderly room, and I had access to the internet because I was an office worker all of a sudden. So only because of that, I was able to type in, I said, there's got to be, I started researching on the internet, and somehow, I don't even remember how, but I pulled up the Army regulation covering conscientious objection, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's AR 600-43. So I pulled that sucker up, hit the damn print button, and on the tax dollar, printer machine, printed out the whole thick regulation. So I went home that night and I read it cover to cover. And then I think, the next night I read it cover to cover again. So I read the damn thing twice. And I finally figured out that I qualified as a conscientious objector on moral grounds, not on religious grounds. So I got the initial application together, which I remember just maybe being a couple pages or something that you initially put in. You have to have a big statement and then maybe a questionnaire or something like that. And you had to turn it in. I think you're supposed to turn it in to your supervisor or something, or some kind of leadership person. I didn't know who the hell to give it to, and I tried to give it to my immediate supervisor, who was an E5, not a bad guy, nice guy, but he was terrified to touch it. So he actually refused to accept it. So I had to go, I just went over everybody's head, and after hours one evening in the orderly room there, I slipped over to the troop commander's office, a captain, and I slipped the application in his inbox on his desk. And so he directly got it. And then the next morning when he's going through his stuff, all hell kind of broke loose over that, But so the process, there weren't any leaders. There was only one leader who actively obstructed the process and actively tried to provoke me into getting in trouble, so that he could, anytime I was facing a UCMJ process, that they stopped the packet at that point. If you're under any kind of investigation, or if you're an Article 15 process, your CO packet gets put on hold. And he figured that out. And this was our first sergeant, who was a real, cowardly bastard type guy. He figured that out, and then he actively tried to provoke me and put me in situations, and even flat out framed me one time. But anyhow, long story short, my process only took 8 months, and that was after being significantly delayed several times because of that one individual. And the one other quick thing I'll say before I stop talking is there was really two kinds of leaders that I noticed. And of everybody who had been with the unit and gone to Iraq, all of those leaders, my troop commander, my immediate supervisor, the executive officer of our troop, on up the line, even up to the sergeant major and those guys, anybody who had been with the unit in Iraq was neutral about it. They were like, oh, I could totally understand why you wouldn't want to do this anymore. And you should probably be out of the Army. Or they were hostile, in their support, like, oh, you're like a coward now, you don't want to fight, well, get the hell out. But
yeah,
the two leaders in my chain of command who had not been with the unit in Iraq, and in fact hadn't deployed anywhere at all, there was a lieutenant and that first sergeant. They had never been anywhere before. They were just vicious and insulting and obstructive the whole time.
But so there, at no point was there a favorable NCO, somebody who was not at least fair with you, if not understanding or accepting, but they treated you fairly.
But my troop commander treated me fairly.
Good to know.
Yeah, he was cool, and he had been with the unit before. He was actually a good dude. And eventually, down the line, a few months later, that first sergeant, it was a long story, but he got in a lot of trouble, and he was about to get his first sergeant rank. He was still an E7, and so they screwed him over on that, prevented him from getting the first sergeant rank, and he was out of our troop. And then we got an actual first sergeant in, and then that guy was really cool, really good guy, and supportive of it. So I was lucky in that regard. And like all the enlisted people around me, all of them who'd actually been to Iraq understood 100% what I was doing, and if not supported it, they were neutral about it. They understood what I was doing. and they agreed that I should be gone.
It's a real careful dance that people try to do there, that they want to protect their career, but they feel conflicted about what's happening, and I guess thankful for that some of the services, some of the resources, being able to print that thing out. It had things been happening and you still been in Iraq and you wanted to stop, you wouldn't have access to information. You wouldn't be able to look up resources or anybody to call or anybody who had been through it before who could give you a tiny bit of advice,
Absolutely. And there was one other guy in my squadron who, before the deployment, he tried to do it too. He was denied. And of course, he had access to zero information. He wasn't able to get on the internet, like I was able to do.
No, looking at the regulation yesterday, I noticed it hasn't been updated since 2009.
Yeah.
And the, like you said, there's no one in a specific size unit, company, battalion, wherever gets trained or certified in any part of that. They read the regulation, it's passed off to the investigating officer, and who you hope you get an impartial one. So before I go on to the next thing, did anybody have anything else they wanted to share? Any stories about leaders supportive or not terribly not supportive, anything like that?
Sure, I'll share a little bit. First of all, Clifton, your story is just incredible, and your strength of will to get that done just amazes me. But I agree. Like when I turned in my packet, they had no idea what to do with, turn it in. My story is kind of complicated because I was called up in 2004, but the ROTC recruiter at my school found out somehow, called me and said, hey, if you join ROTC, you can finish your college degree. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm not in ROTC. But he's like, yeah, you can join at the last minute, which is what I did. So I got myself in a real pickle by signing a contract in the Guard to do ROTC. So the whole problem was I had no idea that conscientious objector existed. I thought it only applied to the draft in Vietnam where people burn their draft cards.
That would make a lot of
sense. Even though I was a conscientious, yeah, I probably was a conscientious objector maybe in 2002 or 2003, just because as a journalism major in school, I was really paying attention to how the war unfolded and what troops were saying when they came home and things going on. And then I started listening to Democracy Now!, which told what the mainstream media was telling. So I just was growing more and more disturbed about what I was hearing and seeing in the news. But I was a conscientious objector until, I still had to go through out processing I had to go through the motions to deploy, even though I had sneaked into ROTC at the last minute. And it was there at that appointment on some paperwork, I saw this little box that said, are you a conscientious objector? And it was like, fireworks in my brain. Like, of course, that is exactly what I am. That's what I am. I'm not just, depressed and conflicted and, regretful of signing up. Like, I'm a conscientious objector. Like, I am object to this war on multiple grounds. But I had just signed, that contract extension, just joined ROTC. So I tried to suck it up and maybe lasted another six months before I started researching it more, came across the GI Rights Hotline. And by the time they sent me that whole huge Army regulation that Clifton talked about, I was due to go to LDAC, which is the Leadership Development Advanced Camp or whatever, where you learn to be. It's like the first of two things that ROCT officers have to go through. So I had to go through that training, like the secret conscientious objector, like thinking about how I'm going to write my big long essay for my application. And I was doing it on moral grounds too. I wasn't religious at all still, and I'm still not. And it's a lot harder to prove your beliefs that way. And that's the wording, is that you have to prove, which is ridiculous, because how can you prove your beliefs? You can state them, you can argue them, you can talk about them, explain them, but I don't know about proof. It's not like,
nothing tangible that you can show someone.
Yeah. Even letters and diaries and letters of support. It's not proof. It's convincing, like convincing documents. But anyway, so when I finally got my packet all ready, because the GI rights told me that that's what I should do. I should get everything absolutely perfect before I turn it in. And they thought that I needed to turn it into the ROTC side, not the National Guard side. So, it was something that I was dreading for months and months and months. But when I finally went there, I was really impressed with how the major handled it. Like, I could tell he wasn't happy, and he was like more exhausted than anything. That I came in there and said, and told him, I have something to tell you. I'm sorry that I didn't tell you sooner, but I was advised not to. And then you could just see him just like harden and be like, oh shit. I'm a conscientious objector. I'm going to be applying for a discharge. And I took out this big binder, and he didn't let me give it to him because first of all, are you sure? Second of all, I don't think I even handle this, and I need to do a lot of research to find out what do I do with it. And he was pretty sure that the National Guard side handled it, but they didn't. It did, and I think that is odd to go through the ROTC side. But he was, and I thought that everyone and all the cadets would know, and I still had to go to class with these people and PT sessions and all that stuff and labs. But I think he only told the other instructors, and one of them gave me a real ass chewing and, told me to withdraw my application, and I was making a big mistake, and, I was a piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. But the one in charge of the ROTC program at the school I was going to was very level-headed and professional about it. And I'm really grateful for that, because it's super stressful, and the stigma for angles of life can be overwhelming. Yeah.
Absolutely. You, when you find yourself in that place where you know that you don't belong anymore, and you're waiting for people's eyes, you're waiting for what you perceive is going to be their judgment. And, even without people talking about the idea of it, that especially among the men in the military, that, did you fight hard enough? Did you do this hard enough? Even if you hadn't. And there's those questions of whether or not your comrades see you as a legitimate soldier, and the things that go into that. But being, saying right there is, I'm not going to fight. I understand you guys have to fight, but I'm not going to. It really, really crystallizes for people. Hearing you guys talk, it seems like that the people's response fits into just a few categories. You have people that were, they were kind of right in the middle, that they understood, but they could not support you. They could not, be out and about it. There were the people that, this is number two, that like that instructor that you just mentioned, that they, remove it, take it back. There's no way you can't say that. That's not, how could you be that without understanding that it's about your morals, not theirs. And the Army's. It's also not about the Army's morals either. We spend so much time hearing about the Army values and all that shit, but we don't ever actually work on learning the values. They're not crystallized for us as things that are actually helpful. So a big step in the process of becoming a CO is the investigative officer. And I'd like to hear from you guys if you have any impressions on dealing with them through your process? Were they accommodating? Were they assholes? Because it seems that there can be a lot of subjective ideas when it comes around to that, which officer is chosen and how they decide to do it. And so, but go for it.
And with my experience, he was clear sailing for me. It was, he was a young captain who worked at brigade. He just got selected. He didn't know anything, had never done it before. And he pretty much, as far as I could tell, he did his job, tried to do his job to the letter. He handled me like I was, he basically just went through the checklist. It was, when I had the one-on-one interview with him, he just went through his checklist. He asked me all those questions. And, like Jorge, I was in contact with the local Mennonites in Germany. So these people had other, besides I had the regulation on my own, but the Mennonites over there, they had other materials to help me prepare. So I knew every question he was going to ask before he knew. So the one place where I tripped up was I was just answering his questions like perfectly. And so that was the one thing that he did that pissed me off was he gave, in his final opinion, he mentioned that he was certain that I had been coached, by an outside group, and that they should take that into consideration, that I wasn't fully genuine, because I had given all these coached answers, But whatever, he was right about that, and I guess he was right to include that in his report, that he observed that I had been coached, or it seemed likely that I'd been coached. But yeah, he was just some guy who didn't want to do it. He wanted to get it over with as quick as possible, and he didn't want to get in trouble, which is kind of how people operate in the military.
Yeah, my investigating officer was I don't know, kind of a guy on a witch hunt, because I'm not sure where he's from, maybe I think another ROTC unit, but yeah, from the very first moment I met him, you're called into the meeting with him, and I asked to record the hearing, which you're allowed to do. I had a tape recorder right there, and he said no. It's like you can hire someone to record it like a court hearing, like a stenographer, but you can't record it with a tape recorder and give me a copy, which immediately it just made me on guard, because there was, 3 of them kind of ganged up against me, my RTC commander, and then another captain, and then the investigating officer. And he kind of acted like a lawyer trying to get me on certain points. And by that time I'd been seeing a therapist, a counselor at school, because I was depressed about everything going on, and he ended up in his summary, basically accusing me of the crime of depression, and accused me of fraudulently enlisting, and recommended me for administrative action. And he did go so far as to say that he found my claim as conscientious objector convincing, and everybody else did too, the chaplain, the psychiatrist, my letters of support were strong, but he just took it so personally that I was doing this, and he said that I should serve as an example and a warning to other RTC units when, National Guard members come knocking on their door, which isn't the case. Like, RTC recruited me. It should be a warning that all these people are trying to get out of deployment, and and then basically said that they should take back any financial assistance they had ever given me, any tuition assistance, any stipend, any bonus, everything. Like, he wanted me to pay back everything. Get demoted, and he wanted my case denied, and that's why I had to hire a lawyer at that point, because I couldn't fight it by myself.
Did having the attorney make it easier with dealing with them? Would it give you kind of a bit of a barrier there?
Yes, absolutely. At that point I was like 20 or 21. So, I composed a rebuttal, all the points that I thought I should say, but taking that to the lawyer and having him draft it in more legal language and in an official document and all that stuff. And I think it makes them notice a little more too, that, you're serious. They can't just steamroll you. And
Yeah.
I have a lawyer, and the next lawyer I had to get, because I moved to the Bay Area, once my case was finally denied, it went all the way up to the top, took a year to do that. And then when it was denied, they said my options were I could enlist in active duty immediately, commission as an officer, and then go to active duty, or face administrative action. And I said, no, I'm not doing either of those things. So I had to hire a lawyer who was ready to sue the government on the writ of habeas corpus, which is, he said, so they denied you, but they can't just say, no, you're not a conscientious objector. They have to give you a reason why you are not. And they didn't do that. That was the mistake that the investigative officer made in my case. He, was tasked with trying to see if I was a true conscientious objector. And instead of doing that, he went to in all these other areas and tried to, make me seem like a schmuck, which, you already feel like a schmuck half the time when you're a CO. At least for me, I feel very proud that I stood up against the war. And I also, feel shame and guilt and about a lot of things too.
No, that
Sounds like he showed his ass big time.
yeah, definitely. And what do you do in those circumstances? If if you hadn't been able to get a lawyer in that same spot, how bad would that be for just in different situations and stuff. And I'm really, really thankful that you were able to do that, and that that's where he went going to court, is that habeas corpus. Explain to us, you've already told us, this lady's a conscientious objector. Why is she still in the military? How is that happening? And it sounds a little like that they were, that they tried to hit the ball up into the air as much as they could until they knew it was going to hit the ground, and then they finally let you leave. So. Hey everyone. I really hope you're enjoying the podcast. But truth be told, I need your help. No, I don't need you to move a couch or borrow a leaf blower. No, I need you to hit pause on your podcasting app right now and share this episode with somebody you know, somebody who you might think might be receptive to it. It could be a friend or relative who's considering joining the military, or a veteran you know who might be interested in hearing a little more truth in their news about military and veterans. We rely on you all to help us reach as many people as possible. So please hit that pause button right now and share this episode with somebody. Sharing all done? Good? Okay, good deal. I know Uncle Al will cuss a lot listening to the episode, but he'll appreciate it when the cursing stops. Now I want to mention something about Patreon. We are always in the market for more Patreon supporters. So if you get the chance, please come out and support us. You could support us for as little as $1 a month. And what do you get for your dollar, you ask? Well, you get a 1-minute drop on any topic you choose once a month. Just email us your question or comment, and we'll give it the old Henry Danny breakdown on air. Guaranteed to have 60 seconds of our time. We may spend more on it. We prefer to do military and veteran topics, but whatever topic you think might be pertinent. And we may spend a whole bunch more time talking about it, depending on the topic. And for contributors, a bit north of $1 a month, we have some bonus episodes, some essays of mine, and a few other things as well. We're still in the process of building our rewards. So if you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards, please let me know. Now, back to the podcast. Fortress on a Hill is expanding. We're going to start doing chapter series as part of our lineup. There are some topics that are simply too big and important to leave to discussing in a single headline. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank all of our honorary producers who are helping us do just that. We rely on the support of our patrons through Patreon to help keep the podcast a success. Thank you to Matthew Ho, Will Arens, Gage Counts, Fahim Shirazi, Henry Zamoda, James Higgins, and James O'Barr. Anyone who contributes $10 or more a month on Patreon will be listed here as an honorary producer. And to all of our contributors on Patreon, thank you for helping us do this. JJ, earlier you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, no, thankfully I haven't had that much of an issue with any kind of leadership having, impeding the process or anything like that. It was a little bit slow going up the chain of command as far as legal review and things like that, but my investigating officer was same as Clifton he was doing his job, doing it to the letter of the law, trying to get it out of the way so he could progress his career or whatever. The most that I've gotten is from like the final legal review guys, and I've never interacted with them, but their recommendations and all that are a little snarky and wanting me to repay the West Point, debt, recruitment, which is something that I'm working on the rebuttal on right now over the weekend. I have to turn it in next week before it goes to the Department of the Army Review Board. So other than that, it was pretty, everyone was pretty much neutral about it. A lot of the soldiers, understood it, because a lot of the soldiers, they joined the military for the economic stability, nothing really else. Very few joined for the hua, the things you see in movies. So they understood, a lot of them understood it. And people at, my peers and my commanders, they're just, it was whatever. It was just something else that someone else, was going through. So yeah, never really had too much of an issue. Obviously, especially in that infantry battalion, when I started thinking about this, I did feel some of that, people were looking down on me, but, I was never meant to be in an infantry battalion in the first place, so it wasn't a big deal.
It's hard. It's hard when it's the stronger the sense of community is, the harder it is to know that you're set out from them. That it's not the same. All right, let me get to my next question here. Sorry, I lost my spot. Okay, so we're in an age now where censorship of the military and of combat is a huge thing, and that unlike in the Vietnam era, word of mouth doesn't have the same power that it did. The Vietnam era anti-war movement, they worked in groups, but it wasn't, we weren't on email lists. We didn't, do maybe a phone tree, I guess, back in the day, but these days, in the age of drones, it requires far fewer pulls of the trigger to cause massive death. But that also means fewer eyes get to know what happened and potentially report it to someone. Add to that the natural compartmentalization of the military, how you don't know what the other guy is doing, whatever other parts of your unit are doing, because you're doing your job. It's not your job to watch them, it's your job to do your job. And then how classification has changed things, that these days I've had several interviews with people who have said that they find things that are embarrassing or insulting, but they don't need to be classified, but yet they're hidden away so that it doesn't make them look bad and consequently the Army look bad. Good examples of this would include like when the Bush administration forbid filming of returning American coffins during Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was an image that was very, very powerful and influential during Vietnam. And that actually got changed when Obama was elected. My question for you guys, because you guys hold unique roles in the anti-war community, so to speak, how do you think the community can best use your guys' experience to inform how we fight for peace? Are there, you know, that I mentioned when we first started that it's most soldiers, most troops probably have never met a conscientious objector. But people need to know about you guys. They need to understand it. They need to know that it's can be done, that people deserve the right to be heard and to have their morals vindicate them. And it goes back to me earlier, what I mentioned about the Army values is that I know I went in believing that the people in the military were trying to aspire to that like I was. That's not the case. JJ, you mentioned earlier, you know, most people join in for economic reasons, not for who would kill people reasons. So what do you guys think? How best can the anti-war community get your guys' experiences to be helpful for the bigger thing? And I realize it's kind of a bigger question. It's just kind of shooting around ideas. But again, you guys have very unique experiences. Rosa, what you've been through, the delays that you went through, the treatment that you received, Clifton, the fact that you wouldn't have known anything had you not gotten that internet access and gotten that regulation. JJ, I'm sure you can speak to being on YouTube and being, you know, and hearing people talk about their experiences, knowing that you're not alone, that what the process is. But I think that you guys hold a really unique place. And so I'd like to, you know how do you think we can best get that out there?
Well, I mean, there's the GI Rights Hotline, which seems to do a pretty decent job. I actually volunteered with them for a while when I first got out. When I first came home, that was 2005, and in those days, they actually were receiving quite a few calls, and I spoke with a bunch of people myself, and when I was going through the process, I contacted them too, and just to, you know, get more information and stuff. Really, the main thing is information. If a young soldier or a young service member knows that they don't want to fight, they don't want to go kill, or they don't want to go back and do it again if they've already done it before, in this day and age, you know, there's enough access to information is not what it was back then. You know, it's a lot easier, I think, I assume, from what little I pay attention to, that people in the military have a lot more internet access now. So as long as the information is out there and there's some kind of supportive, you know, community out there, and whatever's left of the anti-war movement, if it's not really a movement at the moment, I don't think, but there is a community. So there's that, and you know, there's tons of like veteran and even active duty podcasts right now, and most of them, everyone that I've found is sort of anti-war. So maybe just keep doing that. That doesn't hurt. No. Make the information available, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I came across About Face on Twitter. I was only on Twitter like a couple months because I hate Twitter, but it's amazing that all these groups are popping up and they're vocal. And to be honest, I had completely sealed myself off from any kind of veteran community. And if I found out that someone was a veteran, I certainly did not tell them my story. But to see About Face, you know, tweeting all these, you know, anti-war things, peace things, very political things, and they're, you know, veterans against the war, just knowing that community was out there was, and of course I'd never gone looking for it until recently, because I just maybe wasn't ready, but it's awesome when you feel included.
One thing I definitely wanted to mention is your podcast, Rosa, Breaking Cadence. That I think I'm missing just a couple episodes now, but the really drawing out people's stories in that light, and also contrasting it with your own. I've learned a lot from the 4 episodes of your podcast that I've listened to, and I hope that you continue that, because you're going to find so many other stories, people that, it's even stuff that after doing it for so long, it's like, wow, that was crazy. But yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, I do. I really enjoy it. And I think that those are the most important things. And actually, like Clifton mentioned, we now have, 4 or 5 of us that do anti-war stuff in different ways and in different formats. And so, I think that is a really helpful thing for everybody, so that they can, we all lean to certain voices, certain personalities. And so if we get information better from one source or another, but to have that community, like you said, I did the same thing for a while after I got out. I didn't do any veteran anything. And I finally figured out it was because I didn't fit in at the VFW. I didn't fit in at DAV. I didn't fit in a lot of these other organizations where we support veterans and we support the military, and that means we support war. And so, I think I'm still technically a member of the VFW. But knowing, like you said, about FACE, Veterans for Peace, that these organizations have really, it's nice to have a sense of community. It's nice to have a sense of belonging, and to feel safe that you can share those opinions that in normal veteran circles isn't acceptable. MilVet Twitter is usually a gross and horrible place to be for the most part. I mean, some of us are tweeting about the news or making fun of Ben Shapiro or whatever we happen to be doing on Twitter at that given point in time. Any other resources, guys? Any other things you think the community can do? Ramon, I know you're there, man. I how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing good. No, I've just been listening. Obviously this episode's about conscientious objectors, so I want to be here as someone who wasn't a conscientious objector, but looking back, I wish I was. To hear to support y'all's voices and to lift y'all up. I think what we need to do, is start trying to have conversations with youth, with students. I remember in high school, the recruiters were always in there, always talking to us. I think that's is to provide an alternative voice, an alternative a worldview that discusses what the military actually does and what does it actually mean to be part of this of this force. And so you have individual projects that people have, there's Heart in Austin, who does sustainable options for youth, where they go into the actual youth, into the high schools and set tables up next to the recruiters, and they provide information, as far as weighing all the options. What are the reasons for joining? Why don't, what are these other alternatives that are available to you? I joined in 2001 purely out of economic necessity. I had a daughter, I was married, I was fresh out of high school, and that was the option. I needed to provide a paycheck for my family. If I would have known that I could have, there was programs that were available in my community that were geared students towards trade schools and stuff like that, then I could have done that, because college wasn't for me. But I needed that paycheck, so I joined, and that was the only option that I saw. But looking back at it now, joining purely because of economic necessity doesn't negate the fact that I was fighting for a paycheck at the expense of other people's communities, right? Being a part of the invasion of Iraq and all that. So now, with About Face, Veterans Against the War, and other, community members, allies. It's our job to get out there into the community and have those conversations, because I think everything's online and the information is readily available, but it's always good to have a face to talk to, someone to actually have that conversation face to face, and to have to talk about topics that are difficult. So I think being there in our community, trying to provide the information that's available will help us out a lot.
You reminded me of something that I wanted to mention for today, and it has to do with guilt over doing certain things. Is Rosa, I think in your email, when we were emailing, you had mentioned about dealing with the guilt of still being affiliated with the military in some way. Specific, like for me, it's the VA. That the disability money that I get is because of my participation in something that I'm now ashamed of, and trying to figure out how to feel about that. And I think that's where you guys will come in the most strongly, is on trying to find sanity among conflicting views. That there's even with leaving the military, even with not wanting to be in combat, you made friends. So maybe if you went to combat with them, you made brothers and sisters. Because I do still think that there's a friendship under fire that people don't get, but that's mostly stressful situations, not specific to combat. But the point is that how do you do that? How do you accept that you might not work again, and your sustenance comes from one of the sources of your pain?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to make friends in the military, like especially in training, and that's all, that I know, because I never served in a war zone, but it's so easy to identify and laugh with and like your peers until, conversation turns to politics. And then you're just like,
yeah, who
am I talking to? And that's what's so heartbreaking about it. It's like you have so much in common with these people, and then so much you just can't understand how they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. No, it's a really hard pill to swallow, and I think you just gotta leave time with it, I guess. But it's a very hard pill to swallow.
With my experience, we were all totally ignorant of politics. We were apolitical. None of us voted. I was one of the only enlisted people who voted, and we were on a training exercise out in Germany in the field at the time. So it was very difficult to vote. And that was when John Kerry tried to run against George Bush. So I sent in my absentee ballot for John Kerry. It was very difficult to vote. But I will say there was, as time went on and we started to see, we all of us who had been there knew that the war was wrong. And so at that point, it was just like, well, are you going to be okay with doing something that's wrong or not? And of course, most of us, unfortunately, were decided that they were going to just go along with something that was wrong, which is human nature when you're faced with the Army. But I have to say there was a sort of a core group of us who were a little bit more serious about, a lot of us did get out. And unfortunately, most of the guys I know who were politically conscious and who were in touch with their morals enough to want to actively get out of the military, the way they did it was by using a bunch of drugs and getting caught. And several of my friends did that on purpose to get out. Just failed the urinalysis tests one after the other until they got bad conduct discharges. One of these guys was a friend of mine. He was discharged just for using cannabis, as he pissed hot several times in a row and got a bad conduct discharge, I'm pretty sure. And he actually was awarded the Purple Heart during our deployment. He was a medic, and he was in an M113 that rolled over a couple anti-tank mines. And one of the guys, the driver of the 113, was killed And he had a Purple Heart for getting wounded and a Bronze Star for dragging the dead body out of the burning 113. And doing, he did first aid on everybody and stuff as he was wounded himself. Anyhow, and he wound up getting a bad conduct discharge. That's just one of several of my friends who did that. And because that was, you know, we were in a painful place. We were depressed, of course. And we knew that if we got busted using drugs, you could go home. I was using drugs myself too, but I made sure I didn't get caught because I wanted to get out with an honorable discharge. And so, yeah, now I collect a modest check from the VA for PTSD and tinnitus, and I have a busted nose and this, that, and the other. The way that I get over that conflict, my dogs are being really loud right now, sorry. Way that I get around any kind of feeling of guilt or whatever about that, any kind of conflicted feelings, y'all better go. You have to go away. Go on. And he is basically, I honestly feel without a shred of second thought that, you know, the Department of Defense probably owes me about $1 billion for what I did. And this little $600 a month, you know, that's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there is that moral injury of the fact that, you know, I helped or I participated in the invasion of a country, destroying its infrastructure and, you know, causing enormous amounts of damage and death. That now, like, something that I'm absolutely against, and then now getting, you know, disability for it is something that I've come to terms with. I can't question that, as far as like, I can only try and like work like every day to try and right the wrongs of participating and not standing up and not even realizing it, because, you know, we weren't political. Like, hearing all these after the fact, like that there was like the largest march or largest protest in history against the Iraq War. I mean, I was at Camp Pendleton and I didn't hear not one thing about a march or anti-war and nothing like that, because we were so insular. It was just our unit getting ready to deploy and everybody's excited, like, yeah, we're going to go overseas. And it's only until you get there, until you see the destruction, you start to see it, you start to question. So now it's like I use my time, you know, each day trying to work as best as I can to create a better world. And, you know, I'm hoping that at one point in the future that I'm able to like be able to sustain myself without having to rely on my disability, and be able to like donate my disability entirely for to good causes, you know, not something that's going to be for me, you know. So I'm hoping that's my goal at some point, is to be able to like flip that to where I'm financially stable, that I don't need the disability money, and that goes to furthering good causes to help our society. Yeah.
It's that's a great goal, brother. It really is. Something I wanted to mention, Clifton, going back to you talking about your buddies trying to get caught using. I worked for almost 2 years as a drug investigator when I served. I was an MP, and it was you could get attached to the CID office there at Fort Lewis, and you would talk to people who pissed hot on UAs, and the occasional, you know, drug dealer, like soldiers become big drug dealers. But the thing that I learned the most from going through that process was hearing about how people who had been downrange were medicating with these substances. And I heard it so much that to include one guy who actually told me that he tried to kill himself. But it really crystallized in my view about the weight that we had all come back with. And to me, it even reminded me of the weight that I was ignoring. You know, that it took me years after getting out before I started to question roles, question bigger parts of the machine, you know. But I tried to listen as much as I could when I was an investigator. when I started knowing that people were hurting so much and still in uniform. And Clifton, you mentioned a guy that he did it a whole bunch just to get it done. And we had a guy who I think he had like 19 hot urinalysis tests for THC, for marijuana. And we always laughed about it. That made us in the office laugh. It's like, this guy clearly doesn't want to be in the military anymore. But you had other people in there too. The other one that was really hard to stomach was when guys would tell you that they were using on the outside. They told their recruiter. The recruiter told them to lie. And now they were someone with a substance abuse problem in the military. And I had to treat them like a criminal. In the drug world, there aren't specifically victims. The victim is the state or the people that use the drugs. But I think about that sometimes, and but I'm grateful that I went through it, because I wouldn't have had all that time to consider everything that I did and everything I participated in. But that really told me the state of affairs for guys trying to deal with PTSD at the time. Their best option, 04, 05, 06, right in there, was to medicate, get in trouble and get out, ask for help and possibly get some help, or possibly be ostracized because it's weakness of some kind. So, all right, guys. So to close us out today, and we already talked about a few of them, I'd like to, if you guys have any organizations that have resources for COs, anything that you want to recommend, and if you don't remember it right now, you can email it to me. I'll throw it in the show notes. But the places and people that were most helpful to you with your process.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier the Quaker House out of Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Okay.
And I've got their number here.
Okay. Go ahead.
The number is 919-663-7122. And these are the folks that basically held my hand from beginning to now in my conscientious objector process. And they've made sure that I'm doing the right things and going according to regulations. So they've helped a lot.
Can we say the number one more time?
Yep, that number is 919-663-7122. And I actually got in contact with them through calling the GI Rights Network first.
Okay.
So I know Clifton mentioned them.
Yeah, I think that they should be kind of first stop, one-stop shopping for people, and kind of help them find resources that are better for them. And also, some places may be full. Some places may not have resources, but others might. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, the GI Rights Hotline, I've got it pulled up. That's 1-877-447-4487. And their website is girights.hotline.org. You can easily, they got the number right there at the top if you pull it up. And if you call them, usually you'll leave a message. It'll go to a local call center, the way it worked when I was volunteering, and you'll leave a message with your number and what your issue is, and they'll call you back. Another really good resource is the I've pulled up the Department of Defense and Office of Inspector General. They have a hotline you can call. I'm not seeing it right now, but it's not difficult to find. I think
I'll Google it and throw it in there.
Yeah, and based on your branch, I believe each branch has a Inspector General office. So I was always calling the local IG office for the Army in Germany over there. And the thing that they're most useful, that I found them in those days most useful for, is if you're getting undue heat, if somebody's harassing you, who's outranks you, and they're violating rules or whatever, at least the IG will contact your chain of command and put heat back on them. And usually it's almost always enough to make them stop. So you'll get some relief that way. And then really the final resource, it's almost cliche, but JAG, the Judge Advocate General, the damn Army lawyers. When things got really bad for me and that acting first sergeant was really harassing me and obstructing me, when he actually started lying about me and he got some junior NCOs to file false sworn statements against me and stuff. When all that started happening, I went right down to JAG and explained what was going on. And the JAG people actually already knew that my unit was a shitstorm and was doing this kind of stuff. And they put serious pressure on him. And actually, that acting first sergeant got in a world of trouble over that issue.
Cool.
And wound up not getting promoted to first sergeant over it, for example. So JAG is actually, at least in my experience, they actually were honest, honorable people who were trying to do the right thing.
Two more that I'd like to mention: the Center on Conscience.
Okay.
I know the GI Rights Hotline has been referring some people there to do CO applications, and I was listening to an interview. The director or head of that, she said that they had a 100% success rate on CO applications.
Wow.
Yeah, so that if you're going to be a CO, like definitely hit them up. And then Code Pink helped me out. I ran into them at the height of my CO application mess when the investigating officer had just given his report, and they connected me with a lawyer in my area to do my rebuttal. So those Code Pink ladies have some resources and are connected to lawyers.
Yeah, and I would say the same for like the other outside organizations like Veterans for Peace and I guess About Face, which used to be Iraq Veterans Against the War. Definitely, and maybe Veterans for Peace is a little bit more widespread, I think. And so if there is a chapter around you, or even if it's not around you, if you contact them, you'll usually get a response and somebody who's knowledgeable who wants to help.
Yeah, this is Ramon. Another organization that's out there is called Courage to Resist. They primarily support conscious objectors that have gone public, but they provide resources for anybody that's interested in being a CO, and they try and connect people to their approach is a little bit different. They're a project of the Objector Church. It's an interfaith, non-denominational peace and justice community that's rooted in like religious humanism. So they support a lot of the public like very prominent conscious objectors, but they have all kinds of resources. So check out their website at Courage to Resist. Yeah.
All right. I think we got a good mix here. So I want to thank you guys for being here today. It's been a great education for me, and I'm sure it will be for all our listeners. Yes, thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for
nice talking to you all.
Thanks for coming on.
Good being here.
We're on Twitter at Fortress on a Hill, and also on Facebook.com at Fortress on a Hill. You can find our main blog page and our full collection of episodes at fortressonahill.com. iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Patreon, Spotify, you name it, almost anywhere you listen, we're already waiting for you. And hey, we're always in the market for more Patreon supporters. Please consider becoming a contributor at patreon.com. If you're not into doing a monthly payment, think about giving us a couple bucks on PayPal. The link for that is in the show notes. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget that. You'll see you next time.
Attention. I will not